Hello and welcome to the Whispering Worlds channel. How would you feel if the people you trusted most betrayed you when you least expected it? Is it possible to rebuild your life without losing trust in yourself and others? What does starting over mean to you? Is it about changing your surroundings, mindset, or relationships? Can deep emotional wounds become a driving force for personal growth? Whose side would you take? Jack, who's trying to rebuild his life, or Laura, who might have her own reasons for betrayal? It was a quiet, unremarkable Tuesday morning, the kind that makes you believe life will go on as it always has. I pulled my truck into the driveway, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires signaling my arrival home. The house stood there, painted in warm tones Laura had picked out herself, a place that had always felt like our sanctuary. But lately it didn't feel like home. "Hey Laura," I called as I stepped through the door, tossing my keys onto the counter. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, but there was no response. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with her laptop. She barely glanced up. "Hey," she said absently, her fingers still tapping at the keyboard. I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. She used to jump up and greet me with a hug or a kiss. Now, her attention was glued to her screen more often than not. "Tough day?" I asked, trying to bridge the growing gap between us. "Yeah, you could say that," she replied, finally looking up. Her smile was there, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Henderson account is driving everyone crazy." I nodded, but something about her tone made me pause. It wasn't frustration, it was detachment. I had noticed this change in her for weeks now, maybe months. She was physically present but emotionally distant, and I couldn't pinpoint when it started. Later that night, as we sat down for dinner, I tried again. "You've been working a lot lately. Everything okay at the agency?" She shrugged. "It's just the season. You know how it is. Clients want everything done yesterday." I nodded, but her answers felt rehearsed, like she had practiced them. I watched her push food around on her plate, her appetite as absent as her warmth. I wanted to push further, but I stopped myself. Laura had always valued her independence. She hated being interrogated, and I didn't want to be the overbearing husband. "Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway," I suggested instead. "Just the two of us." Her eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Surprise? But she nodded quickly. "That sounds nice. Let me check my schedule." I should have pressed harder, should have asked why her schedule suddenly seemed so full. But I didn't. I wanted to trust her. After all, trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. The following week, I was in the middle of a site inspection when Greg called. His voice crackled over the phone, tense and unfamiliar. "Jack," he began, his words hesitant. "You got a minute?" "Not really," I replied, holding the phone between my ear and shoulder as I signed off on a delivery. "What's up?" I don't know how to say this," he stammered. "But I think you should know something." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Greg and I had been through thick and thin together, building our business from scratch. He was my confidant, the guy I trusted with my life. But right then he sounded like a stranger. "Spit it out, Greg," I said, growing impatient. "It's about Laura," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think something's going on." My stomach dropped. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Look, man, I don't want to get in the middle of this," he said quickly. "But I've seen her with someone." At first, I thought it was just a client meeting. But what, Greg?" My voice rose, drawing the attention of a few workers nearby. "There's this guy, Drew," he said, the name hanging in the air like a curse. "I didn't want to believe it, Jack, but you deserve to know." I hung up without another word, my hands trembling. For the rest of the day, I walked around in a daze, replaying Greg's words over and over. Who the hell was Drew? And why was my wife meeting him? That evening, I sat in my truck outside our house, staring at the warm glow of the windows. I wanted to march inside and demand answers, but a part of me wasn't ready to hear the truth. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Laura had left for another late meeting, her phone left carelessly on the kitchen counter. I stared at it, torn between respecting her privacy and the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. Before I knew it, my hands were moving. I unlocked her phone. It was easy. She hadn't even bothered to change her passcode, and opened her messages. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the conversations. Most of them were harmless, just chats with coworkers and friends. But then I found the thread with Drew. My stomach churned as I read the messages. They weren't just casual. They were intimate, filled with inside jokes, plans to meet, and photos that made my blood boil. When Laura came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of me. "Hey," she said cheerfully as she walked in, but her smile froze when she saw my face. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice cold. "Why don't you tell me, Laura? Or should I ask Drew?" Her face went pale. "Jack, How long?" I interrupted, slamming the phone onto the table. "How long have you been sneaking around with him?" "It's not what you think," she started. But I wasn't in the mood for excuses. "Don't you dare lie to me," I snapped, my voice shaking. "I read the messages, Laura. I saw the photos. So don't insult me by pretending it's nothing." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wanted answers. I deserved answers. "It's been a few months," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "It started as a mistake, but—" "A mistake?" I cut her off. "Mistakes don't last for months, Laura. Mistakes don't involve sneaking around and sending God knows what kind of pictures to another man." "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "And yet it did," I said bitterly. "Was I not enough for you? Was our marriage not enough?" She didn't answer, and that silence was all the confirmation I needed. The days that followed felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Laura moved out, taking only a suitcase and leaving behind a house filled with memories that now felt tainted. The emptiness was suffocating, but it was better than pretending everything was okay. I confronted Greg at the office. "How long did you know?" I demanded. "Not long," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Laura swore it was over, Jack. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations, Greg. You failed," I said bitterly. "You should have told me the moment you found out." Our partnership didn't survive the confrontation. I couldn't work alongside someone who had kept such a devastating secret. Greg left the company, and I poured myself into work, hoping the physical labor would drown out the pain. But the nights were the hardest. Alone in a house that once echoed with laughter, I replayed every moment, every clue I had missed. How had I been so blind? The morning after Laura moved out was eerily quiet. I woke up to an empty house, the sunlight filtering through the blinds doing little to warm the cold void left in her absence. Her side of the bed was empty, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering on the pillow. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything. It felt unreal, like some cruel prank I couldn't escape. Her suitcase was gone, but she had left behind a trail of reminders. Her favorite coffee mug on the counter, a forgotten scarf draped over the back of a chair, and the framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Maui that she hadn't bothered to take. It sat on the mantel, mocking me with the memory of happier times. Later that day, I called Greg to confront him. I was sitting in my truck outside a construction site, my phone gripped tightly in my hand. The call wasn't planned. The anger and betrayal bubbled up out of nowhere, and before I knew it, I was dialing his number. "Hey, Jack," Greg answered, his tone cautious. "We need to talk," I said bluntly, "and I don't mean over the phone. Meet me at the office in an hour." Greg didn't argue. He must have known this was coming. When he arrived, I was already waiting in the conference room, pacing back and forth. He walked in, his face a mix of guilt and apprehension. "Sit," I said, pointing to the chair across from me. He hesitated but obeyed. "Look, Jack, How long did you know?" I cut him off, my voice cold and measured. Greg ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. "A few weeks," he admitted. "Maybe a month." "A month," I repeated, my voice rising. "You knew for a month and didn't think to tell me? What kind of friend are you, Greg?" "I didn't want to hurt you, Jack," he said defensively. I thought maybe it was just a phase, that she'd end it. I didn't want to blow up your life if there was a chance. You didn't want to blow up my life? I interrupted, slamming my hand on the table. Newsflash, Greg. My life was already blown up, and you stood there watching like a coward. Greg flinched but didn't respond. The silence between us was deafening. Did you know the whole time? I asked, my voice softer now but no less accusatory. When you saw her with Drew, did you know it wasn't business? At first I wasn't sure, he said quietly. But then I saw them again. The way they looked at each other, I couldn't ignore it. And instead of coming to me, you kept your mouth shut? I said, leaning back in my chair. Why? Greg sighed heavily, finally meeting my eyes. Because I didn't want to lose you, Jack. You're more than a friend, you're family. I didn't know how to handle it. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You lost me anyway. Greg's face fell, but I didn't care. The trust between us was shattered, and no amount of apologies would fix it. By the end of the week, I had bought out his share of the company. Miller and Grant Builders became Miller Construction overnight, and Greg was gone. At home, the solitude hit me harder than I expected. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. I tried to keep busy, working late at the office and tackling home improvement projects that didn't really need doing. But no matter how hard I worked, the emptiness followed me like a shadow. One evening, I found myself in the garage, sorting through a box of old photos. There were pictures of Laura and me from our dating days, candid shots of us laughing at a picnic, and photos of us decorating our first Christmas tree together. Each one was like a dagger to the heart. I picked up a photo of us at a 4th of July barbecue, our arms wrapped around each other, fireworks exploding in the background. I remembered how she had insisted on wearing that ridiculous star-spangled hat, and how I couldn't stop laughing at her goofy grin. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. What happened to us, Laura? I whispered to the empty garage. The days blurred into weeks, and the strain of it all began to take its toll. Emily, my sister, called one night, her concern evident in her voice. Jack, you don't sound like yourself, she said. You can't keep bottling this up. What else am I supposed to do, Em? I snapped more harshly than I intended. Talking about it won't change anything. No, but it might help you make sense of it, she said gently. You don't have to do this alone. Her words stuck with me. That weekend, I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Harper. Walking into her office for the first time felt strange, like admitting I was broken. But Dr. Harper didn't treat me like I was fragile. She listened patiently as I poured out my story, her calm demeanor grounding me. Jack, she said after I finished recounting the events, it's natural to feel angry and betrayed, but you can't let this define you. Let's focus on what's within your control. Her advice was simple but profound. Over the next few weeks, I began to unpack my emotions with her help. I learned that it was okay to feel hurt, to grieve the life I thought I had. And slowly, I started to find small ways to move forward. One night, Laura called. Seeing her name on the screen sent a jolt through me. I hesitated before answering. Jack, she said, her voice tentative. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling up again. How do you think I'm doing, Laura? I know I hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. And I'm so sorry. I never meant to. To what? I interrupted. Destroy our marriage? Lie to my face? Cheat on me? Her silence was answer enough. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Laura, I said finally. But I know one thing. I deserve better than this. Hanging up the phone felt like closing a chapter, but I knew the story wasn't over yet. Healing would take time, and for the first time in weeks, I was okay with that. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. In the months following Laura's departure, I realized how much of my identity had been tied to being her husband. Now, without that anchor, I felt adrift. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into it, taking on more projects than ever. Early mornings, late nights, weekends. I stayed busy to avoid going home to an empty house. My crew noticed the change. Rick, my foreman, even pulled me aside one day. "Boss," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've been pushing pretty hard lately. Maybe take a day or two off." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Rick. Just keeping things moving." He didn't push further, but his worried expression lingered in my mind. Was I working to stay productive, or was I running from my pain? That question stuck with me, especially during my sessions with Dr. Harper. Therapy wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but Emily was right. It helped. Dr. Harper had a way of cutting through my defenses with simple, probing questions. "Jack, what do you want your life to look like now?" she asked one day. "I don't know," I admitted. "I never thought I'd have to ask myself that." "That's okay," she said gently, "but it's something worth exploring. Right now, your energy is focused on keeping busy. What would happen if you let yourself slow down?" The thought terrified me. Slowing down meant facing the full weight of everything I'd lost. But it also planted a seed of curiosity. What did I want my life to look like? For so long, my plans had revolved around Laura, around us. Now, I had to figure out who I was on my own. The first step in rebuilding was reclaiming my space. The house, once a symbol of our life together, now felt like a mausoleum of memories. Every room held reminders of Laura, the throw pillows she had picked out, the wedding china gathering dust in the cabinet, the half-finished garden project in the backyard. One Saturday, I decided to change that. I started with the bedroom, stripping the sheets and replacing them with a new set I picked up at the store. I rearranged the furniture, moved her knickknacks into a box, and even painted the walls a deep blue. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fresh start. The living room came next. I sold the couch we'd picked out together and replaced it with a sleek leather one. I swapped out the old photos for new artwork, pieces that spoke to me personally. By the end of the weekend, the house felt a little less like ours and a little more like mine. A few weeks later, Emily stopped by for a visit. She walked through the house, her eyes widening at the changes. "Wow, Jack," she said, grinning. "This place looks amazing." "Thanks," I said, feeling a small swell of pride. Figured it was time for a change. She nodded, her expression softening. "I'm proud of you, you know. It's not easy to pick yourself up after something like this." "I'm trying," I said simply. That evening, we sat on the back porch with beers in hand, watching the sunset. Emily had always been the pragmatic one, the rock of our family. I leaned on her more than I cared to admit, but I was grateful she was there. "You ever think about dating again?" she asked casually, catching me off guard. "Not really," I admitted. "Feels too soon." "That's fair," she said, taking a sip of her beer. "But when you're ready, don't let fear hold you back. You deserve to be happy, Jack." Her words stayed with me long after she left. One afternoon, as I was sorting through paperwork at the office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected number. "Amanda, hey Jack. This is Amanda from Laura's office. I hope it's okay to reach out." I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Amanda had always seemed friendly, but we hadn't spoken since Laura moved out. After a moment's hesitation, I typed back, Hey, Amanda. Sure, what's up?" Her reply came quickly. "I heard about everything, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. If you ever want to grab coffee or talk, I'm here." Part of me bristled at the idea of talking to someone connected to Laura, but another part appreciated the gesture. A few days later, I took her up on the offer. We met at a small cafe downtown. Amanda greeted me with a warm smile, her brown eyes full of kindness. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I know it's probably weird." "A little," I admitted with a chuckle. "But I appreciate it." As we talked, I realized she wasn't there to pry or take sides. She genuinely wanted to help. "I had no idea what was going on," she said, shaking her head. "Laura kept everything so private. If I'd known, I would have told you." "It's not your fault," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of my words. "It's just a mess." Amanda nodded. "Well, for what it's worth, you seem like a good guy." You didn't deserve any of this. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been caught up in my anger and self-doubt, questioning if I'd somehow failed as a husband. Hearing someone else validate my worth felt like a small but meaningful step toward healing. After that, Amanda and I kept in touch. We weren't close friends, but her occasional texts and words of encouragement became a small bright spot in an otherwise difficult time. It was a reminder that not everyone in my life had let me down. The months following Laura's departure were a slow, uphill climb. Each day felt like a battle, against anger, against sadness, and most of all, against myself. But little by little, I started to feel like I was regaining control over my life. Therapy became a cornerstone of my routine. Dr. Harper had a knack for asking the hard questions, the ones that forced me to look inward. During one session, she posed a question that stuck with me. Jack, if this hadn't happened, if your life had gone exactly as planned, what would you be doing differently? I sat in silence, the question echoing in my mind. I guess I wouldn't be questioning everything, I said finally. I'd just be coasting. And is coasting what you really want? She asked gently. The question lingered long after our session ended. For years, I'd built my life around comfort and routine, thinking that was the ultimate goal. But maybe, deep down, I had been settling. The betrayal had ripped away the safety net, forcing me to confront truths I'd avoided for years. I started exploring hobbies I'd abandoned long ago. On a whim, I dusted off the old acoustic guitar I'd shoved in the back of the closet. I spent hours relearning chords and strumming songs I hadn't played since college. My fingers were clumsy at first, but the music brought a strange sense of peace. One weekend, I signed up for a woodworking class at the local community center. Building things with my hands had always been therapeutic, and it felt good to create something for myself, not just for work. By the end of the course, I'd made a small coffee table, complete with uneven edges and a slightly wobbly leg. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I also started reconnecting with people I'd drifted away from. An old high school buddy, Mark, reached out after hearing about what happened. Man, I'm sorry you're going through this, he said over a beer at a local bar. But if anyone can come out stronger, it's you. His faith in me felt unwarranted, but it was comforting nonetheless. We started meeting up regularly, swapping stories and reminiscing about the old days. It felt good to have someone in my corner who wasn't connected to Laura or the life we'd built together. One evening, as I sat on the porch strumming my guitar, Emily called. "Hey, big brother," she said. "How's life in Bachelorville?" I laughed. "It's a work in progress. Listen, I've been thinking," she said, her tone turning serious. "You've been through hell, but you're handling it better than I ever expected. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Em," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "That means a lot. I'm not just saying it," she continued. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. And when you're ready, I think you'll find someone who appreciates that." Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pang of bitterness when thinking about relationships. Maybe I wasn't ready yet, but the idea of opening myself up to someone new didn't feel impossible anymore. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. By the time a full year had passed, my life looked entirely different. The house had been sold, and I'd moved into a cozy cabin on the edge of town. It wasn't as spacious as the old place, but it felt more like home. The view from the porch, a stretch of rolling hills and a small, serene lake, became my favorite part of the day. I had also rebranded the company. Miller Construction was thriving, and I'd built a reputation for honesty and quality that attracted clients from all over the county. Work kept me busy, but it no longer felt like an escape. It was just part of a fuller, more balanced life. One evening, while picking up supplies at the hardware store, I bumped into Amanda. "Jack," she said, her face lighting up. "Fancy seeing you here." "Hey, Amanda," I said, surprised but genuinely happy to see her. "What brings you to this side of town?" "Just picking up some stuff for a project," she said, holding up a bag of paint rollers. "I've been repainting my living room. It's a process." We ended up chatting for a while, And before I knew it, I'd offered to help her with the painting. That weekend, I showed up at her apartment with a can of primer and a toolbox. As we worked, we talked about everything: work, life, and the strange twists and turns that had brought us to that moment. Amanda was funny, sharp, and refreshingly straightforward. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about the past. By the time we finished, the walls were a soft shade of green, and we were both covered in paint. "Not bad for a couple of amateurs," she said, laughing as she wiped a streak of paint from her cheek. "Couldn't have done it without you," I said, smiling. Over the next few months, Amanda and I grew closer. We started with casual coffee dates and long conversations that stretched into the night. She wasn't just someone to pass the time with. She was a reminder that life could still hold unexpected joys. One evening, as we walked by the lake near my cabin, she turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Do you ever think about the future, Jack?" she asked softly. "Every day," I said honestly. "And for the first time in a long time, it doesn't scare me." She smiled, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Took time, but I learned to forgive, not just Laura, but myself. The betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I never imagined. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, shaped by choices I had made and lessons I had learned. Standing on the porch of my cabin one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to this moment. And for that, I was grateful. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.